I would thank you all for being here. This is a very exciting times and a really exciting campaign, and I would love to tell you about what's going on and how we are going to ride the wave of history that is changing under our feet. We don't have to change history, it's already changing. We just need to be a part of it and give it a voice, and especially give it an electoral voice, because big changes are happening that are not reflected in our political system for reasons that I think we're all familiar with. But I would love to just do another quick go around, just name and one sentence about how you happen to be here because your mother forced you to come, or whatever it was. Maybe just to set the background, I'll run through sort of the usual stuff that I generally talk about in the stump speech, because not to make this formal, but just to kind of wrap up, stump speeches really telescope a lot of stuff into a few words. So I'd like to just give you the benefit of how we see things and where we see the campaign going. And the bottom line is that this is a historic moment for all kinds of reasons, and thanks much to all the activists out there that have really created a new, just a whole new landscape. And we see this happening in the Occupy movement, in the democracy revolutions in the Middle East, in the uprisings in Wisconsin, that there is this new kind of force for democracy and social and economic justice that has really been kind of missing in action for quite a while. And suddenly it has sort of come out again. And at a time when people are really questioning their political affiliation, and to look at polls or to talk to people on the street, people are pulling back from the political established parties now in greater numbers actually than we've seen in quite a long time. So you put it all together and it makes kind of the conditions of a perfect storm for taking back this vision of a democracy that we're supposed to have but don't really have now, and also the things that we need to be a sustainable society and an economy. And generally, I think of the future we need as a peaceful, just, green future. And it kind of has to be all of those things. We need social and economic justice, we need peace, and we need sustainability if we're really going to, that is ecological sustainability, if we're going to make this work. If any one of those is missing, it makes it very hard to do all the others. So we're clearly not going in that direction now, and it is a perfect storm because the problems that we have now are not small, they're global problems, and they've reached a point where probably for the first time in history we can really say that the future of the planet and the people who depend on it really is hanging in the balance in no uncertain terms. So it really is kind of this perfect storm in many ways. And it's clear that the political establishment has played quite an enabling role, whether that political establishment is called Democratic sometimes or whether it's called Republican sometimes. Both of those, shall we say, parts of the spectrum of political establishment have contributed, and neither one seems to be capable or willing to fix it. So just a brief overview is that we have massive bailouts for Wall Street, and both Democrats and Republicans have delivered that. We have the layoffs for working people. We have declining wages for workers, attacks on Medicare and Social Security. We have the expanding wars for oil. People thought Obama would be a peace president, but hasn't turned out that way. He's actually gone much farther than George Bush ever went, or probably ever could have gone. And we can talk more about that if you want to hear the blow by blow. But the record is really pretty clear about that we've vastly expanded the war machine under Obama, and it continues to expand. And here we are on the threshold of yet another disaster in the Middle East with the attack on Iran, which is not needed. It's another wild goose chase for weapons of mass destruction for which there are no indicators, and it blows apart the real way forward towards peacemaking. go into that, and nuclear disarmament, which is what should be pursued for the entire region, not just for one country. It ought to be pursued as a as a matter of international law and treaties for the entire region. And actually for the whole world, too. We need to get to nuclear disarmament, but this would be a good place to start. Then, too, you have the privatization of education, including now increasingly higher education as well, the student debt crisis that's coming out of that, with most graduates up to their eyeballs in student debt, and with the very difficult jobs prospect that college graduates, like everybody else, is facing, but the unemployment rates, as I'm sure you know, are particularly sky high among young people. The rollback of our civil liberties, and this also is something that people were very vocal about under the prior administration, but under the current administration, people have sort of silenced themselves in the opposition, so it's not as vocal as it would have been under George Bush, and we've really been rolling back our civil liberties, especially with the National Defense Authorization Act, the renewal of the Patriot Act, the continuing existence of Guantanamo, the recent Comitas, what is it called, the law that basically allows the military now to be used against U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. So our civil liberties are in tough shape, and of course the plundering of the environment and the climate. So to look at the whole spectrum, we got a lot of problems, and they are very much moving forward under, whether it's under the name of a Democrat or under the name of a Republican, we've been getting pretty much the same deal. So the good news is that people are standing up and saying no more of this. This is not okay. And again, we're seeing that in the Occupies and the democracy revolutions and so on. So people are standing up like we haven't seen in generations. And this is a very hopeful thing. And essentially that is why I'm running this campaign for president, because that movement for democracy and justice is alive and well in our communities and in the grassroots and all across the nation, but it is not reflected in the political establishment whatsoever. So that movement needs a voice in this election, and it needs a choice in the polls, so that people don't have to just walk in and vote for candidates who otherwise are sponsored by Wall Street and corporate America. Voting for them is essentially, it provides a mandate for 4 more years of Wall Street and corporate rule. So it's hard to argue that voting for more of the same is going to give us anything but more of the same. That's why our campaign is here. So what this movement is calling for, is essentially a new politics and a new economy, and that's fundamentally the centerpiece of our campaign. Excuse me. So our focus, our leading issue really is what we call the Green New Deal. Excuse me. The Green New Deal, which will, in short, put the economy back on track and create a new economy. A green economy for the 21st century, which is sustainable and localized. The Green New Deal is based on it's inspired by the New Deal of the New Deal of the Great Depression, which got us out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. And the New Deal would create 25 million jobs. It would essentially eliminate unemployment. In doing so, it would put an end to the recession, because it would create the jobs and thereby prime the pump and get the revenues coming back into the state and national government. So it would sort of reprime the pump for the entire cycle of budgets and spending and so on. It would also green the economy and substantially combat climate change. Hi, you're welcome. Come on in. Have a seat. And thanks for joining us. It would focus particularly on jobs that green us ecologically, so that means jobs in renewable energy, and clean manufacturing, and relocalized agriculture, and organic agriculture, and clean renewable energy, which also has the benefit of making wars for oil obsolete, which is always a nice thing. The Green New Deal would also create jobs to make our communities sustainable socially and economically, as well as environmentally. So we would also consider teaching jobs and child care and elder care and nurses, after-school workers, violence prevention programs, etc. Meeting our social needs is also part of being sustainable communities. It would create a mix of private sector and public sector jobs. And public sector jobs would be created where the private sector cannot do it, much like the Green New Deal back in the 1930s. So it would create a mix of subsidies and grants and incentives, particularly for small community-based businesses and cooperatives, as well as public works projects. It would be nationally funded and locally controlled, so that it's not a cookie cutter and it's not administered by some big, large bureaucracy. It is a community-based program which would be controlled at the level of the communities and defined at the level of the communities. And because the Green Party supports not only jobs but also the conditions of working people, part of the Green New Deal is ensuring that we have those conditions covered, essentially, so that we have a secure workforce and a secure middle class, which is rapidly becoming less secure and smaller all the time. So the Green New Deal would provide health care as a human right through a Medicare for All system, which basically extends the age of eligibility for Medicare. It would save us a ton of money, contrary to the popular myth that, oh, how could we afford it? The truth is we can't afford not to do it. Right now, 30% of every healthcare dollar is spent on bureaucracy and paper pushing. Under Medicare, you know what it is?
10.
It's like 3%.
Really?
Believe that? Yeah, it's astounding. It's 3% overhead. So that's 27 cents on the dollar would be saved, which is huge. It's almost, close to a third of healthcare expenses. That would be used to expand healthcare so that everybody's covered and you're covered comprehensively. So the pills that aren't covered, or mental health services, chronic care. So if you have a chronic disability, or you develop a disease of aging and you need to go into a nursing home, that is covered, unlike now when you have to basically go into poverty in order to get covered by Medicaid. So it's a good system, and there's enough money from the streamlining of bureaucracy to actually fund the whole 9 yards. And here's where it actually begins to save money. That's money that gets redirected from bureaucracy to expanding care. It actually saves money in stabilizing medical inflation. The biggest driver now of rising healthcare costs is not the aging of the population, and it's not that the population is getting sicker, which we are in many ways as well. The biggest driver is just the inflation through the private healthcare insurance system. So all that goes away under a Medicare for All system. According to some analysts, like Dean Baker at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, I believe, a respected, fairly middle of the road economist. Welcome, hi, come on in. Talking about Medicare for All with healthcare as a human right. His estimate is that we can basically pay off the national debt just by moving to a Medicare for All system. Now, when economists talk about paying off the national debt, it turns out they don't mean the whole thing. They mean what they consider the excessive and problematic part of it, which they usually define as about $4 trillion. But $4 trillion is a lot of money, and it's about a third of the total debt over a decade.
Wow.
Well, and that's actually what they are aiming for right now in the current budget. I should say the current debt deals that have been worked out. They've been aiming for $4 trillion, but they've only gotten to $1.2 trillion. So they're not there at all. If they would only do the right thing on healthcare and actually deliver the goods, they could save all the rest that they need. And in fact, there are a few other things they could do as well. So they don't actually have to cut teachers and fuel oil assistance programs and what else are they cutting? You know, anti-poverty programs and all kinds of things. So everything is, what's that?
Small change.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So there is a good way to do this. That's the healthcare for all piece. College debt is another part of the Green New Deal, which would forgive student debt because we forgave the debt of the bankers and they caused the problem, and their debt is much larger, 13 trillion, 14 trillion, depending on how you count it. We have given away in free loans or just straight out giveaways to bail out the bankers. Why don't we bail out the students who didn't cause this problem, but were actually victims of the problem? Yeah.
How much is the aggregate student debt that you're suggesting?
$1 trillion. Right, so it's actually small compared to the bankers' debt that we took on with, you know, without blinking an eye. We took on banker debt, even though they were the guys that threw us over the cliff. Students are actually the opposite. Not only do they not throw us over the cliff, but the economy relies on new blood and fresh vision and just the energy of a generation in order to renew the economy. This is just something we have to continually replenish the imagination of the economy. We need young people coming into it who are not indentured servants, that are either in debt for life and maybe headed towards debtors' prisons when those really take off. You know, who knows? Let's hope not. Knock on wood. I'm not being entirely facetious there, but I hope so. I mean, I hope that that is a facetious comment. And the debt. Let me back up for a minute. I'm not sure where that thought exactly left off. Oh, yeah, the point about why we need to bail out students, because their energy and their creativity, et cetera, is needed to keep the economy going. And it's not just getting them out of the dangerous, precarious situation they're in, but there's a real benefit to society here, not only from reviving the economy, but also if students are putting all their spare change into repaying debtors, it's not going into businesses and local economies and the things that help revive the economy. So that is another reason why we need to do this. This is like the stimulus package, you know, made in heaven, basically, for the economy.
I'm sorry, and so how would you have the structure for paying for college for students who are in now or going to be in?
Great. And that is another piece of this, which is that it's not only forgiving the debt, but also making public higher education free. And I'll tell you why. When 1 million soldiers came back from World War II, we paid for their college education in what was called the GI Bill. For every dollar that was invested in their education, $7 was returned to our state and national coffers in increased revenues from a more productive economy. So it's clear this is an investment up front, but it is an investment that pays for itself many times over. The other reason we need to do this is because a high school education was essential in the 20th century for economic security, and we provided it. A high school education no longer does the trick. You now need a college degree or at least 2 years of a community college in order to achieve economic security. So the bar has moved and it's time to provide it. Yes.
But how much of that is because we fired all the teachers? I mean, there's been decay in the public school system since then, I think.
That's
and I don't know
right.
how much of that is, you know, knowledge moving onward and increasing, and how much of that is lack of maintenance, basically.
Well, you know, the real driver of the firing of school teachers has been budget cuts. It's
Yeah.
not because, you know, the teachers were bad, etc. Yeah, right. So you know, is your question sort of why does a college degree create security?
Well, if we, if your proposed improvements to the basically returning the pre-higher education public system to its previous state,
Yes.
how much of that would make it not necessary for everyone to go to college?
That's right. We wouldn't be forcing people to go to college, but what we would do would be ensuring that those who want to go to college can do so.
Okay.
It's pretty clear if you look at who's hurting in the current economy, and even before the recession, an education through college was a very good predictor of not only your ability to get a job, but your ability to then train for changing conditions on the ground, which is why we don't subscribe to what Obama is proposing, which is that we turn colleges into extensions of corporate workforce training, which is what he's proposing, is that colleges buddy up with big corporations and do their workforce training for them. That is not a good idea. We need an educated electorate because democracy depends on it, because lifelong learning depends on it, and because the economy shifts in ways that we can't entirely predict, and we all benefit in enormous ways from an educated electorate. So to look at the numbers alone and to bean count it, as we did with the GI Bill, it was very clear that from a financial perspective alone, it was extremely worth doing. But even brushing aside the financial perspective, it is so worth doing just from quality of life and quality of our democracy. So that's...
Which democracy would that be?
Well, not the one that we have, because we don't have one. Yes, exactly. That's right. That's right. So we talk about, you know, taking back the promise of democracy. We've had a promise and have had various degrees of delivery of that promise. But we clearly need to take back that promise of democracy in order to get these other things that we need, which is why the Green New Deal is not just an economic program, it's also a system of financial reform and a set of democracy reforms. So I'll mention briefly the financial reforms include breaking up the banks that are too big to fail, because if they are too big to fail and they fail again, which they are, many of them are teetering on the brink of still because we never asked real financial reform, because the predators are still running the chicken coop up there in Congress and the White House. So we need those reforms. One of them would be breaking up the banks that are teetering on the brink and creating public institutions out of them, so that we have state banks like, what is it, North Dakota, South Dakota, which are extremely useful, helpful, stable. They've done wonders to stabilize their economy, to ensure that businesses can get the loans that they need, that communities can get the money that they need, etc. It's a win-win. It's a well-kept secret. We should be moving in that direction as well. It's not to dividing up the investment and the commercial banks again, like the Glass-Steagall used to do. We need to bring back a version of Glass-Steagall. Obviously, that was not done with the recent financial reform, regulating derivatives so that we're not going to be pulled under by the collapse in Europe, which could still happen easily. And we're so invested in it through the derivatives process and betting on who's going to win and who's going to lose that it could have, you know, not good consequences for our economy too. So we would need to regulate derivatives. Moving to the financial reforms, I'm sorry, to the democracy reforms. We need to get money out of politics. We need to get lobbyists out of our legislative process. There are simple and straightforward ways to do it. We can go into that more if you would like. But for the purpose of an overview, I'll just leave it with that comment that we can do this. This is not rocket science. We know how to do it. We can get the money out. We need to get corporations out of the business of owning the rights of people in personhood. They are not people. The Constitution was never written to give corporations the rights of people. And in so doing, we can reclaim our rights as of personhood, free speech, etc. The right to protect our environment and our communities, the right to make laws and not have them overturned by corporations who don't like them because, because they want to be able to ride roughshod over our environment, our economy, and our lives for that matter. And then they're not held harmless because they have all the rights of people but not the responsibilities.
Can't put them in jail.
Exactly.
Like the insurance,
Right.
the insurance industry overturned 3 elections in Massachusetts 10 years ago.
That's right. That's right. We passed
2 to 1. 2 to 1 that
passed it
passed.
2 to 1 in Massachusetts. That is public financing of campaigns. We passed it through a voter referendum by 2 to 1.
How I met you, collecting signatures.
Right. Okay.
And then I moved here, and what's Finnerty? I forget his
Finneran,
name.
yeah, he went to jail.
Finneran.
Yeah, they all go to jail eventually.
He went to jail.
He went. Well, he was indicted, found guilty. So he's a felon. Now he may have had his term waived. I don't recall the details, but DeMacy, who followed him, is now in jail. So we have just a whole history of felons as our Speaker of the House in Massachusetts. As anyway, it's the rule. It's not the exception, unfortunately. Yeah. Question, comment?
So my understanding is that a number of countries in Latin America, a number of Latin American democracies have a law in place that makes it illegal for some period of time to go, basically the revolving door between
Yes, exactly.
lobbying. They have a law that prevents that for 8 years or 10 years in some cases, or some period of time like that. What are your feelings on the plausibility of implementing something like that?
Well, let me come to that in a minute, because that applies to everything that we have discussed. What is the plausibility that we will pass a healthcare system that actually makes healthcare affordable and secure, or that we will have jobs, or that we will conquer the climate problem? And that's why, to my mind, it makes sense to just put it all into one. And because you have to fight as hard for any one piece of this as you do for the whole comprehensive solution. Plus, when you're actually doing the whole tamale, you've got a lot of people who will come on board. You can bring a whole bunch of constituencies who will see that, wow, this is how we get to critical mass, and this is how we effectively fight this battle. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I just want to mention the war issue, that part of how we fund all of this is by bringing the troops home, not only from these illegal and immoral wars, but also from the, there's somebody who's coming in here. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Friend of mine. You want to grab a chair, or
Yeah.
you want to grab a chair? Yeah.
No, I'm gonna.
Okay. Could you sit up? Thanks.
My name is Douglas Campbell.
So, obviously we need to bring the troops home from the wars that have been not making us more secure, to say the least, and have been making us a lot of enemies, and feeding and nurturing the resistance, including the terrorists who readily replace themselves with 5 every time you off 1, you get 5 more. Especially when you're drone bombing civilians, it doesn't make a lot of friends. So just look at what's going on in Iraq now. It's not as though we have left a stable country. It's on the verge of a civil war. The Taliban are doing great in Afghanistan after the longest war in American history. So war as a foreign policy has not been successful, to say the least. And it will be an incredible boon to our budget to bring back that person power and the $1 trillion that we spend every year, actually. It's $1 trillion on the military, industrial security complex. So a lot to benefit from there. Plus, because we have the Green New Deal, and we're creating green energy, we don't need wars for oil, they become obsolete. So it all kind of fits together. And one other thing I want to mention is that when we green the economy, it also transforms our health. Here's why, and I say this as a medical doctor. Right now what we have is not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system. right? $1 trillion a year, yet we know that 75% of those dollars are spent on chronic diseases that are readily prevented for a fraction of the cost if we simply have healthy communities. That means clean air, clean water, we're not poisoning ourselves with pesticides and air pollution. It means we have a healthy food supply, unlike what we've got now, which is anything but healthy. It means that we have a transportation system that actually encourages us to be active, like Copenhagen, where 40% of people bike to work. If we had a public transit system that dovetailed with safe sidewalks and bike paths, we can help embed physical activity into our daily lives and encourage it and nurture it in work and in school and so on. That doesn't happen now, but if it did, we would begin to see our health transformed. And if you want a quick piece of evidence, when Cuba's oil pipeline went down, and I'm not talking about Cuba's healthcare system, which is actually exemplary. Forget about the healthcare system, because their healthcare system didn't change during this period of time. It remained stable. What changed was their economy. It was a fossil fuel economy until their oil pipeline went down with the collapse of the Soviet Union. When that happened, they had to suddenly, overnight, get out the draft animals and put people to work and start a system of organic agriculture because they didn't have the fuel to drive the tractors or the fossil fuel fertilizers or pesticides. So they had to go to organic agriculture, not by choice, by necessity. Their diet changed to a healthy, predominantly plant-based, fresh food diet with lots of good fruits and vegetables. And their transportation changed to where they had to walk and bike a lot and use public transit. They couldn't be fossil fuel based. Their air also got cleaner. It's not documented by how much, so I don't know exactly how much that factored in. But the point is, when you move to a green economy, things changed. Do you know what happened to their health? So their economy is crashing. Their GDP went down something like 80%. You know, I mean, this is like all out crisis. We think we're in crisis when our GDP goes down 2 points or 3. So this was all out crisis in Cuba. What do you think happened to their health? People are really stressed. I'll tell you, their death rate from diabetes went down 50%, their death rate from heart attack went down 30%, death rate from stroke went down 30%, all-cause mortality went down 20%. This was over a course of about 3 or 4 years.
All-cause mortality.
All-cause mortality went down 20%. Do you believe it? I know. While they're having all this economic stress, they're getting so much healthier because they're eating well and they're physically active. We spend $1 trillion a year and we can't come anywhere close to what they did by spending $0 just in moving to a green economy. They didn't spend anything on healthcare. So, you know, it just makes the point that there are all these benefits. It's a win-win-win to move to a Green New Deal. And let me wrap up just saying that these are not ideas that are foreign to the public. If you take a poll, these are the things that people support over and over again. They want to bring the troops home. They want to downsize the military. They don't want austerity. They want a jobs program. They want a healthcare as a human right. This is what the American public wants. Why don't we have it? Well, to cut to the chase, we have a political system that's controlled, but we have had independent political candidates now and then. In recent years, there has been a big fear campaign. No, 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 you can't vote for your values. You can't vote for the things that you want. You've got to go in and give a mandate for more of the same. Where have we gotten with that? You know, essentially we now have 10 years. It sounded compelling to a lot of people 10 years ago because a lot of people backed way off and they said, you know, oh my goodness, I dare not. I better fall in line and vote for stuff I don't really believe in. And we now have 10 years to show that the silencing our voices is not an effective political strategy. Because where have we gone with it? The politics of fear has delivered everything we were afraid of. What were we afraid of? An expanding war? That's why you were supposed to be quiet. We were afraid we would lose jobs, that Wall Street would do great, and middle-class people would hurt, and jobs would go overseas, and there would be more free trade agreements, and all these terrible things that the bad guys were going to do happened anyhow, because the politics of fear gives you what you're afraid of. Now, why is that? If you look back over the history of how we've made progress, it takes two things. It takes a social movement for the abolition of slavery, for women's right to vote, for the rights of workers to an 8-hour workday, to safe conditions in the workplace, to be able to unionize and have a union. It takes a social movement, but it also takes a political voice and a political movement. Every one of those achievements happened not just with a social movement, but with a political party, an independent political party, a third party that took up the cause and moved the cause forward, eventually driving it into mainstream parties. So in these last 10 years where the fear campaign has been so relentless, people have backed off on independent politics and there has been no voice for it. So there's been no movement forward. We've only moved backwards. So we're saying we don't need fear and silence. We need values and voices. That's how you begin to drive the political process forward. Being quiet won't do it, because if the public interest is quiet, what's left? It's just the Wall Street sponsored campaigns that, you know, will continue with more of where we're going that isn't getting us there. So this is the time to answer the politics of fear with the politics of courage that stands up for the promise of our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future that we deserve. How are we going to get there? We are getting on the ballot. We're now in 20 states. We're on already in Michigan, so that's not a burden you have to worry about here. If you want to help in Indiana, they have a very steep requirement. It's one of the most oppressive in the country, but they are so pumped now. They are so motivated. It's really exciting. I just came from there, and it is so exciting to see. They are really determined to get on the ballot this time. So we're doing our best to help them. We are on the ballot now in Utah, where we haven't been for a while. We have a new party in New Hampshire that's working on this ballot drive. We are forming new parties now all over the place. And in the same way that this movement for democracy and justice is rising up in the Occupy movement and the democracy revolutions and the Wisconsin uprising and a hunger strike at the University of Virginia, and there's just an incredible flowering of principle and vision. It's happening all over. It is working its way into the Green Party as the one organized political party that has survived the onslaught against progressive politics. If you look at the Labor Party, the Socialist Party, the New Party, the Progressive Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, they all began as national initiatives, but in this climate of fear, they have all been beaten back and silenced and smear campaigned and fear campaigned. The Green Party is the one political party that has survived. I'm not sure why that is, but I think it has something to do with the fact that once you see the green vision, you don't go away. You can't forget that we are of a whole and that the welfare of people and the economy also depends on the planet. So we are the one option for a politics of people, peace, and the planet. And we're moving forward with the ballot drives, which are going like gangbusters, and with a matching fund drive. And I just want to mention that because we have the opportunity to receive federal matching funds, and that is for every dollar that we bring in, they will match. There are certain criteria, so it's donations only up to $250. If you have very deep pockets, you can contribute up to, I think it's $2,500. But
or you can start a super PAC.
Oh, you sorry, yes, we declined to do that. We have actually internal rules against accepting money from lobbyists or from anyone who would hire a lobbyist, so that we do not become embroiled in money with strings attached. We consider that a safeguard. So if you have money you want to contribute, we accept it, provided it doesn't come with strings attached and that it complies with all the rules of campaign finance. To be matched, it can be a contribution of $1 or $5, you know, whatever you can contribute. We are getting there. We need to get $5,000 in these contributions, $5,000 in each of 20 states. Once we've done that, then the floodgates open and the feds give us in one fell swoop $100,000, and they then continue to match dollar for dollar all the fundraising we do. So it's really, it will be the first time that a third-party candidate has qualified in probably 20 or 25 years. It will be the first Green Party candidate to qualify. Ralph Nader made it, but he technically wasn't a Green Party candidate. Right. He was running on the ballot line, but he wasn't a candidate. And he has his own machine that does amazing things. It will be the first time that a real homegrown campaign of the Green Party has made matching funds. So those are the little yellow forms. And Libby, can you bring over some little yellow forms? In fact, bring over both piles of yellow forms. So, and you want to just pass them around.
How far are you from that goal?
We are now, we now have 3 states that have qualified. There are about 5 more that are very close to qualifying, and maybe 6 more that will take a little bit more work. So we could be there easily in a month. We could be there with some work in 2 weeks.
Have you considered a Kickstarter campaign?
What's that?
Have you considered a Kickstarter campaign? No, seriously.
Can you do politics on Kickstarter?
Absolutely.
You can do
Pretty sure.
electoral campaigns?
It's not Kickstarter, there's another service that does something analogous.
Okay, well,
For political campaigns.
send me suggestions. We are doing, web-based fundraising and money blooms as opposed to money bombs, which is what Ron Paul uses. We use money blooms. So it's largely a web-based drive using alternative media and the internet and Facebook and all that. And that's how democracy succeeded in Tunisia and Egypt, where it had a much steeper road to hoe than we do here. So we encourage people to, let's go for it and let's push what we can. And whether we are 2% or 52% of the vote, it is a win simply for reclaiming our voice and beginning to move the process in the right direction and beginning to drive real solutions into the campaign dialogue that they will otherwise be locked out of. So with that, thank you.